Welcome back to another episode of the B2B Founder Podcast, where we help founders and business owners grow their companies from 0 to 10 million. I'm your host, Brett Trainer. I'm a big believer that success translates across all areas of life, business, and sports. Today's episode is a great example of this. Coach Gene Heidkamp joins the podcast today to talk about building high-performance teams, creating a great culture, getting buy-in, how teams can be better than the individual talents, plus how paying attention to the details and trusting the process can lead to success. You may be asking, who is Gene Heidkamp? He is one of the most successful prep basketball coaches in the state of Illinois over the past decade or decade plus, and had the third winningest program to be exact. He has done this without having the most gifted athletes. In the 10 years, Benet Academy actually had 4 players, or only had 4 total players that went on to play D1 basketball with scholarships, where the other top programs had 30 plus D1 athletes. One program actually had 12 future D1 athletes on one roster. So just a summary, the Benet Program had the third most wins in Illinois from 2010 to 2020, only trailing 2 national powerhouse programs. They averaged 25 wins during that span, always playing one of the toughest schedules. Only program during that duration to have 20 plus wins each season, and played in 2 state championship games and have won multiple in-season tournaments. I think his approach translates very well to startups, small business, and even organizations within, large companies that are struggling to build high-performance teams. We go deep on his philosophy, his strategy, and how he gets 18-year-olds to buy into this approach. It was a fascinating conversation. Take notes. I took a lot of them, and I think you're really going to enjoy this. So at the end of this, please do make sure to visit our website where you can find the show notes, plus the links mentioned with Coach Heidkamp. If you enjoy this podcast, please subscribe so you're always the first to know when a new episode is released. Now, let's get the interview started. Hey, good morning, Coach. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to have the conversation.
No, the pleasure is all mine. And as we were talking a little bit offline, the reason I really wanted to have you on the podcast is talk about building high performance teams, culture, process, things that tend to get overlooked in our instant gratification lifestyle at times. But I did want to give just a little bit of a background to provide context for some of our listeners who are not from Illinois and understand high school basketball, that you and the Benet Program have over 300 career wins, and congrats on that, by the way. The Benet Program had the third most wins in Illinois, or at least in Northern Illinois, from 2010 to 2020, trailing only 2 national powerhouses, which people may have heard, Simeon and Morgan Park. You averaged 25 wins during that span, and always playing one of the toughest schedules, which we'll get into. I got some questions on that. The only program, I believe, to have 20 plus wins in each of those seasons. Also played in 2 state championship games and won multiple in-season tournaments during that span. But what I didn't mention, the one that really stands out to me, and Coach, correct me if I'm wrong, I think during that time frame, you only had 4 kids that actually went on to play at D1. Is that right?
That is correct. Our last Division I scholarship player was in 2014. We did have 8 Division I walk-ons, which I think really speaks to the character of our kids, and I can talk more about that later. But as far as scholarship players, we had three Division I scholarship players in the last decade.
Which is fantastic. But then when you compare it to some of those other programs, Simeon, Morgan Park, I think over that same 10-year time frame, I lost count, but it's at least 20, if not 30 or more of those kids went on to play at D1 schools. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that one Simeon team had 12 future D1 kids on one roster at one time, which was just insane. And again, that kind of brings me back to why I wanted to have you to talk about, man, with that, I want to call it disparity in talent. I think some of the kids you had are really good players that may have gotten overlooked, but being able to compete, and not even just compete, to be super successful against those other programs. My first question is, how did you do it?
First of all, we have really good players. Like, hitting on that, the Division I They recruit based on what they think potential at that level, not necessarily how good players are at the high school level. So they recruit more based on potential than production. And, obviously the success that has come through this program has been player based. I've had really good players, and great kids. And that combination has worked really well for us. So it starts with the players. I wouldn't trade my players for anybody else's players. So it starts and ends there. But I also have great assistant coaches. I have people that I can really rely on and depend on that have done an excellent job. And many of them have been with me the entire time I've been here at Benet. So, being, the leader of the program has been relatively easy with the type of people I deal with on a daily basis. So when you get high character people that work as hard as our guys do, oftentimes you can have some success. And I've been really fortunate to be dealing with these type of kids and obviously the coaches that I have on my staff.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. And there are some, really got to know some of the kids over the year, really good kids, enjoyed, like I said, the entire program, but still even at an individual basis, right? Is this kind of like the sum is but more than the individual parts?
Well, I think that's the beauty of basketball, not to speak to other sports, but basketball is one of those sports where the sum of the parts it may be more important than the individual talent. People buy into their roles and it all come together. There's a lot of sacrifice involved and unselfishness involved. But when you see those things and your kids have those attributes, you have a chance to be really good. When you add talent to unselfishness and commitment, that's a pretty successful formula.
Yeah. So with that being said, going back maybe the early portion of your career, how did you develop kind of that mindset, right? Or your approach? I'm like, how am I going to build a program, with Benet and the stop that you had before that? Where did your approach come from? Because we honestly don't see it as often anymore, right?
I'm in my 29th year, so I've had a lot of experience. I was an assistant coach for 12 years before I became a head coach. So all the experiences at the 3 different schools that I've been at have really, helped shape my philosophy. When I came to Benet, I was fortunate to have some really good players here. And those guys really took it and ran with it. Their approach to the culture and their work ethic and their commitment, they really wanted to be good and they really wanted to succeed. And through my experience here, that set the table for the following years. Now, Bennett's had excellence in basketball, has a tradition of excellence in basketball for going on 50 years now. So to be the coach at Benet is quite an honor and a privilege. And I think the thing that's most important to me is to try to maintain the culture, that we hopefully do things as well as we can and try to do them the right way. And if you do things the right way, oftentimes that'll take you where you want to be.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And maybe you could touch on a little bit what your philosophy is. You don't have to give away the secret sauce, but just curious what your approach.
I wish there was a secret sauce. Approach is really simple. We try to live in the moment as much as possible. I always want to have a 5-year plan as to where I envision our program to be, but I don't think you get to where you want to be if you don't invest everything you have into the present. And that's kind of the approach I've taken with every team. Every year you get a team, you want to try to get the most out of the team, but you also realize that that's their one experience at high school athletics at this level. And we want to give them the best experience that we possibly can. So whether it's a summer league game, whether it's a weightlifting session, whether it's skill development, we invest everything we have into what we're doing. And I don't really set a lot of long range goals. We have standards that we try to live up to. And we want to do things as well as we can on a daily basis. And if you do that enough, I think oftentimes you'll find the success that you're looking for when you have the type of kids that I'm fortunate to coach.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So if you're approaching this season, is it just the same approach? Is it about execution? Is it about fundamentals? How do you kind of balance I guess maybe just take a step back. What is your approach? Let's kind of talk about heading into a season. Where is the focus? Do you mold the system around the players? Are you looking at players into the system or some combination of the two?
Maybe a combination of the two, but more the system around the players. Every year it changes based on the personnel and the talent that you have. So you want to do what you can to be most successful. So schematically, it might change a little bit year to year based on your personnel. Like when we had some really good post players, Frank Kaminsky and Sean O'Mara, some names that people might know if they follow basketball. And we played more of what we call 4-out 1-in system, which is with a post player inside. There's been other years that we play with 5 perimeter players. One year we made it to the state championship game in 2016, and we didn't have anybody bigger than 6'3". So the schematic approach might change from year to year, but the intangibles never change, and that's work ethic, commitment, culture, the things that we value most importantly in our program if we think we're going to try to get the most out of each team. So, X and O wise, that changes year to year. But as far as the characteristics that I hope define our program, I hope that those are consistent.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense. And so if you think about, because if you look at the entire program, the 4 years, you got kids right from 15 to 18 on average. And it's really hard to get them to, or anybody at any age to buy into a system, to make a commitment to the details. And from the outside in, it looks like that is one of the cornerstones of the program is getting these kids bought into the system. So maybe just touch on how maybe that's evolved over the past few years, or it's something that's been kind of consistent throughout your coaching career.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with having unselfish kids. And that's probably the thing that we emphasize the most. And we talk about sacrifice on a regular basis, that none of us are probably going to get everything that we want. But if we're willing to play for each other, and that's kind of what I emphasize, is that, this is a team sport and they're playing for each other. And oftentimes they have to take a little bit less than maybe what they would want in order to be successful. But it's really rewarding when you achieve that success. And I think that the kids that come through our program have seen that from the kids that have proceeded, to the point where they feel like there's a formula there that if they follow that, they could be successful. So it's re-emphasizing a culture that was established by other players long ago, and getting our kids to buy in, and understanding that if they buy in and, if they really care about each other and invest in each other, that they have a chance to achieve great things. And there's a real belief in that. I think that's part of it, is sometimes people talk about these things, but, we invest and we believe in it. We believe that we want to compete against the best programs that we can in the state. And that's part of what our kids are drawn to, with the utmost respect for those programs. But, that's part of what they want, is they want to go to the best tournaments. They want to play the best schedule. And, that's part of, how would you say it, really wanting to achieve at a high level, and the schedule and the commitment and the things. It's not hard to get kids motivated in June when they know they're going to go to the Pontiac tournament at Christmas time. So these are great opportunities. They're lifetime experiences, and the kids are willing to give up a little bit in order to, sacrifice for each other, and hopefully achieve the success that they're all trying to attain.
Yeah. And again, looking from the outside, so I'm curious if a big believer in the process, I'm assuming, right? Because it looks like, again, the one thing your team year after year, they look the same, or they play. Let me take that back. They play the same, right? It seems like it starts on the defensive end. If you don't play defense, you're not going to get as much playing time. But I don't want to put words in your mouth. Is that fair?
That's spot on. Our defense is the backbone of our program, and we're not going to have a chance to compete against those great programs that I was talking about before if we don't defend. So defense it has to be a constant. We have to play great team defense, and in order to have a chance in some of the games, to achieve some of the things that we talked about before, that defense is the backbone. No question about that, and that is buy-in. That is something that has a lot to do with heart and intelligence. Obviously athleticism is going to help you become a better defensive player, but you can overcome some things defensively with toughness and heart and intelligence, high basketball IQ. So that's something that, it's definitely got to be the backbone of what we do. And then offensively, it changes year to year based on how much scoring potential that we have. We want to play an up-tempo style. Sometimes our scores are a little bit lower, and people think that's because we're more deliberate offensively, but that's really not our plan at all. Sometimes our defense, what we call tempos the game, and that creates lower scores because sometimes teams have difficulty scoring against us. And that's really the goal. So I don't want to get too far off into the basketball X and O's, but you're spot on with defense. And that is a personal characteristic or attribute. You got to care about it, and you've got to work at it. And our kids have done a pretty good job at that. They're lucky that way.
Yeah. And I think even just talking about the defensive end, you're right. Because in Illinois, we don't have the shot clock in high school basketball yet, right? Try not to get too far into the basketball. But the word, right? Well, how would Benet do in a shot clock era because of how methodical the offense is? And I would argue that the defense is, or your opponents are going to struggle much more because they take a whole lot longer trying to find a shot versus your defense versus your guys on offense trying to find that first open look. So I never bought into that argument.
Right. I agree completely. It's a major misconception that somehow the shot clock is going to affect us negatively or adversely. It's not going to at all. It actually will play into our hands. So if it comes around, and it looks like it will be coming around soon, I don't think it'll change anything that we do.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting time. Maybe that's a discussion for another time.
Sure,
but,
exactly.
Yeah, and then maybe touch on to the process side of this, right? Because I'm a huge believer, whether in life, business, sports, right? It's all about the execution. The teams that are prepared and execute are going to perform against maybe, again, we've talked about the talent, but other teams that may have more talent, but that don't pay attention to the details, right?
Well, absolutely. We are a detail-oriented program. And when we prepare for each game individually, we'll spend minimally 2 days on each game, 2 to 3 days, and go through our opponent's game plan, what they look to do, what their set plays would be, and their base and out of bounds plays. I think detail is a huge component of our program. And you can have the greatest plan in the world, but if the kids don't execute, if your people don't execute the plan. So in my opinion, the execution of the plan is more important than the plan itself. There are a lot of people that have great plans, but you have to find a way to bridge that gap and make sure that when the game comes around, that our kids are able to go out and execute the things that we want to do. And, I've been lucky that way, that our kids take the detail and they're able to apply it. So there's definitely a process when it comes to game with attention to detail, but we want to be detail oriented year round, whether we're in a summer game, whether we're in an off season workout. Attention to detail is something that's, we need that in order to have a chance to compete with the best programs. And we're hoping that maybe that's something that might separate us from others if we do it well. So the process is absolutely the most important part. The execution of, is the carrying out of the actual plan is really what brings about the success.
Yeah. And I think that's such good life lessons too, right? As I kind of touched on it. I don't think we teach or coach enough of that in the workplace or in life in general. So, I mean, that's just a life skill that you pay attention to the detail, focus on execution. You have a really good chance of being successful in kind of anything that you do. So, yeah, I think that's appreciated. It's probably skills that the kids probably don't appreciate at the time, but looking back, I bet you they come to appreciate it.
Right. It's sometimes it can be a grind, but they do come to appreciate it. And just like anything else, if they see the reward at the end of it, they're much more inclined to want to do it. And then when you don't do it, they're wondering if you cut back your approach, they wonder why you're not doing what you normally do. And they want that because they know that it may give them an advantage or it may help them when it's time to come out and play. So absolutely, it could be a little bit of a grind, but it's an absolute necessity. And when they see the reward, they're very willing to buy into it.
Yeah, and perfect kind of segue into the buy-in question, right? We talked a little bit about success and how other teams have accomplished that, and you get that to buy in. But what's kind of your approach, or how do you deal when you have some adversity? Or I think back to the one state runner-up team that you had. I think you were 11-7, into January of that season, but ended up winning almost 30 games, if I recall right. So how do you approach that from a leadership standpoint when you do have these small letdowns or bigger adversities that come up? If I just made up that word, but you know what I'm saying.
Right, absolutely. That was a tough year for us. At one point, we were 11-7. We played a very challenging schedule, but it's one thing to play a challenging schedule, and it's another thing to actually beat some of the teams that are really good on your schedule. And obviously, that wasn't happening at the rate that we would have liked. And I think our leadership of our seniors really helped turn the corner. You have to keep it together when you face a little bit of adversity. You have to keep your eye on what you're aiming for. Our long range hopes, or I say goals, even though we really don't set goals, but the idea that we could play with anybody that year, I think was still something that we very much believed in, but it wasn't happening at the rate that we were hoping for at that time. And there was a major turnaround at the end, and we went on and won. I can't remember exactly how many games. We went on a nice run, and the game that season ended in the state championship game when we lost by 2 points to a great Whitney Young team. But I think keeping focused and also keeping our composure when things can start to splinter apart, especially when you're dealing with teenage kids or people start to point fingers or blame others, and keeping that together. And again, coming back to the idea of commitment to each other, sacrifice, unselfishness. You know, the old adage, you win together and you lose together. And it's the truth in life in general. And, you know, as we were suffering some disappointments, we tried to keep it together as much as possible. And that year was very rewarding because of the struggles. And we wouldn't have been in that position at the end of the year if we didn't overcome those struggles. So it was one of those things where I was really proud of our guys that year because it could have gone the other way and they fought through it. And by the end of the year, they were playing great basketball and basically we were playing with just about anybody in the state.
Yeah, no, that was a really a fun year. And, you know, it's kind of the follow-up question to that, I guess, is right. It kind of sounds like you're instilling leadership into, in this case, students. But if I think about it from a startup and a team or even a team within an organization, right, you really need to get the team to kind of buy in and take ownership of that direction. How, I know you've had some success in previous years, but how do you coach that or teach that or develop that within a team? Is it just part of the process? I'm curious.
Well, that's a great point. And honestly, as you were asking, I was thinking about our best teams kind of to an extent coached themselves down the stretch of the season because everything was in place and it was just a question of putting a game plan together for me and them going out and taking the details and executing it. But I never had to coach effort. I never had to coach unselfishness. I never had to coach the intangible things that the kids brought that out of themselves. And our leadership was so strong that, you know, you can take a step back and really enjoy the process when you get in that type of situation. But I definitely think those are attributes that are developed not only through the course of the season, but throughout their time in the program. They learn from the older players. They see the examples that are set. You know, I could mention some names, and we had some great leaders come through our program, and you know, the imprint of those leaders, you know, is passed down from year to year. And it's important to our guys to keep the culture where it was, and that's probably the most important thing to them. But as far as down the stretch of the successful teams, the leadership within our locker room of our players, I say to our kids all the time, is our best teams are when I coach the least. That's because there's so much self-ownership of the process, and you know they look forward to the game plans, they look forward to the practices, and they want to go out and they want to achieve at a high level. So, you know, I'm not sure if I necessarily hit on exactly what you were asking about, but it is something that I think is player driven. That my job is to steer the culture and make sure that it stays intact, and their job is to go ahead and keep it going, you know, hand it down from one team to the next.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And you did answer the question, because I think about it from even a business standpoint or a startup standpoint, and a lot of founders or CEOs, right, kind of dictate what the process is going to look like, and teams don't develop their own ability to, I don't want to say function, because they can function, but maybe not make the right decisions, where you're kind of empowering the team to take ownership, take responsibility, control the destiny, versus, right, we see it all often in the business side that everything's got to go through the CEO or the owner or the founder. And those tend to not be the most high performing teams, because they're always waiting for direction, right? Or they're always waiting for what's next versus just going out and doing their job.
And I try to empower our kids as much as possible throughout the entire process, throughout the year, whether it's a weightlifting plan, whether it's, you know, their workouts in the off season. You have to give them a say and a voice in it if you want them to achieve at a high level. So at the end of the day, I'm responsible for it, but I take a tremendous amount of input from our leaders in our program to see what they like and what works for them and what they don't like, and try to make it all work.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's flip it around you a little bit, where things have been really good and the team has bought in, and, you know, the leaders, you know, self-leadership. But I'm sure you've had some kids, and we definitely won't name any names, but I'm sure there over the years, there's been some times where a couple of kids haven't necessarily bought in. And how do you approach that? Because I think that's a perfect kind of analogy for business, right? You may have an employee that's not bought into what the system is, and could be, I don't want to say danger to the other kids, but it could dilute, right, some of what the rest of the team is doing. How do you approach that?
Well, two things come to mind. Number one, direct communication. I think you always have to speak with the player. You have to have a relationship with the player and find out where the player's coming from. And, you know, you have to listen. You know, I think oftentimes as coaches or adults, it's our way is the only way. but you also have to understand where your players are coming from, or where your people are coming from. So they have an issue, taking the time to sit down with them and listen to what they have to say. My door is always open for any of our players. I always tell them you're going to hear both sides, though, and I'm going to tell you where I'm coming from. And oftentimes people think by coming to see you, it just means there's going to be change. Sometimes there's change, but oftentimes there's just a better understanding of where both sides are coming from. So I think communication is the key when you're dealing with 15 to 18-year-olds, like you mentioned before. Direct communication where you try to take out the gray area is important. And I also think peers are important. It's not something we discuss, but somebody's not doing what they're supposed to do, and you have a culture that's strong. Their teammates, are going to work behind the scenes, not through any direction of the coaching staff, but they don't want the culture to be brought down by one individual or two individuals that may not be willing to sacrifice or may not see it the way that everybody else sees it. So I think that there's the two ways that generally gets worked out for us is I try to speak with the player directly, and also their friends and their teammates will talk with them as well, because at the end of the day, they all want to be pulling for the same thing, and that's the success of the team.
Yeah, that's great. And I do, right, it points back to the culture of the program. You've built it, you've instilled it, right? And it's other people now want to uphold it. It's hard to get to that point where you've created it, but then maintaining it may become less of a challenge. But I mean, again, it's the hard work up front to kind of build that culture. I'm just kind of curious. I want to be respectful of your time, but I do have a couple more questions. One being, right, you said 29 years and kind of focused on the last 12, 13. Man, what's changed, or how have you grown, or what have you kind of changed in your approach, let's say in the last 5 to 10 years?
As I get more experienced, I've always felt like I'm a player-centered coach. Like I listen to my players. At the end of the day, I'm responsible, and I think they know that. They know that technically I'm in charge, but I want them to be comfortable. I want them to have input, and I want to listen to them as to what they think is going to be best for them. As I get older, I realize more and more that this is their one experience at high school athletics, and that it may not be what they want it to be all the time. Like I'll keep large teams. I've had 18 to 22 people on a high school basketball team, and that's probably as large as anybody around in the area, but they all have to be willing to buy in, as we talked about before, and also basically play for each other and be accepting of maybe where their role is. And as I've gotten older and more experienced, I realized whether you're the 18th player or you're the best player on the team, that what you have to bring value to the program. You have to bring, my expectations as far as commitment to the program don't change based on their role in the program as far as playing time or as far as position on the team, is that everybody needs to be valued. I think I've always tried to do that, but it's become even more priority for me, and that everybody has to buy in. But that experience of the 17th player on the team is an important experience, and there's value to that. If not, we wouldn't keep somebody on our team if there wasn't a value to what they brought to the organization or to the program. So just having a bigger picture perspective of not only about it's really never really been about winning games. I hope the winning might be a byproduct of the kids really buying into each other. And I've never really started coaching because I had some great desire to win a state championship. I love what I do. I love being around the kids. I love to see things work well. I love to see kids buy in, all those intangibles that we're talking about on selfishness and sacrifice. It's really rewarding to see kids carry that out and have success. I've never really had a long-term goal or vision in regard to we have to achieve this measure of success. It's kind of accumulated by just worrying about the present day, worrying about trying to get the most out of each team and each individual. And we've been really fortunate to have a chance to play in just about every game you can play. And we haven't won them all, but we played in, like as you mentioned before, a couple of state championship games and some really high-profile tournament championship games. But I think that comes to really valuing the role of everybody and kind of living in the moment, worrying about, I always have a long-term vision as far as, where I want to see our program in 5 years. But I also, I don't get too far outside of the moment. I'm worried about trying to have the best shoot around that we can have that day, or the best weightlifting session, or the best summer league game that we can have at that point. And I think that, when your expectations are the same as you go through the process, that leads to, if the kids execute the way they're capable of, that leads to some success. And I've been really lucky to have the players that I've had.
Yeah, I love that. And like I said, I'm a big believer in the process. And I forget it, who was the coach I heard it from, but, love the process, and eventually the process will love you back, right? Focus on what you can control, and then the outcomes will follow. And if you're too focused on the outcome and don't pay attention to the detail, is where you tend to get tripped up. So I think that's really good advice. And I just want to hit one more follow-up question before I get to my last question, which is on expectation setting, right? Is that, obviously you have that. I'm just kind of curious, is that at the beginning of the season, you sit down with each of the players, the team, and hey, here's the expectations of the program. Just kind of curious to hear more specifically how you approach that.
Well, the expectations are some of the intangibles that I mentioned before. I don't have to worry about our kids being on time. I don't have to worry about how hard they're going to work. I don't have to, there are times they take care of things on their own. And I think that's part of the culture that was established before. So our expectations are more about the process. Again, I guess maybe I'm just following up on what we just talked about. I don't have expectations in a number of games that we need to win, or what tournaments we need to win, or do we have a chance to win the conference? Like I said, I know maybe this is short-sighted, but I just worry about present. And I think if you do that enough, then you get a chance to achieve some of those things. So we don't sit down with a goal board. We don't talk about, if you guys do everything you can, maybe you have a chance to make it downstate, or maybe you have a chance to win the conference. Instead, we talk about being ready for that day and doing everything that we possibly can. That doesn't mean that we don't talk about, and we do talk about this amongst ourselves, is that feel like we can compete with anybody when we do things the right way. We also know that we can lose to anybody if we don't do things the right way. So our team might be a little unique that way. Our program is, we're not just going to go out and overpower people. We have to perform. We have to compete. But we also feel, and again, with all due respect, because I'm talking about some great programs, everybody should feel that way about their program, that if they do things the right way, that they have a chance to go out and they want to compete against the best. So we respect all of our opponents. We know that we have to play every time we step on the floor. But as far as long-term expectations, the expectations are more about the process and how we approach it than any type of tangible reward in regard to number of wins or conference championships or making it downstate, things like that. We worry about that as they actually come about during the course of the season. If we're not in a position, if you set a goal to win a conference championship and you're not in a position to do that, what does that mean? The season's a failure. You still have to move forward, and you have to work at getting better and improving your team and your product every day. So we stay in the moment. I know maybe that's, like I said, short-sighted, but it's kind of how we've done it over the course of the last 13 years.
And it's worked. And I don't think it's short-sighted. And I think, too often leaders take that approach as more cliche, right? We take it one day at a time, one game at a time, but they don't reinforce or instill that approach to the process. So like I said, I'm at heart, I'm a process guy. So I love that. I love the culture aspect of it and just setting the right tone. And you're right, the outcomes will come. It's hard to change that, but if you do all the right things, you're going to give yourself the best chance of success.
Absolutely. I've been really lucky that kids have bought into that process, and I've been fortunate to be a part of some really great teams.
Yeah. All right. So I got to ask you before I get to my one final question is, how's the squad look this year?
Well, I'm always excited about our group. We lost 4 starters from last year, but I like our next year senior class, and we have some good young teams. So, this is part of the fun of the process, is trying to make it all work, trying to merge it all together to see who's going to compete and emerge, and how we're going to look come March. The summer was a successful summer, but there's so much work to do, and there's a lot of depth on our team. So we may not have the one player that we rely on to score. We have multiple players that can score and multiple players that can defend. So it could be another exciting team with the sum of its parts, like we talked earlier. So I'm really looking forward to getting these guys on the floor in November.
Yeah, that'll be fun. It'll be good to have a full basketball season again, right? Post-pandemic. Fingers crossed that it goes that way. One last question. I know I keep telling you one last question, but just along those lines with expectations and the motivation, right? With all the success that Benet's had over the the past decade plus, or even going back to the 80s, right? It seems like every year there's no love for Benet and but yet at the end of the season, you're always there. Do you use that as motivation at the beginning of the year, or is that outside noise that you don't pay attention to?
I try to stay away from it because preseason predictions are just that. Nobody really knows. Those are based primarily on who's coming back from the previous year or who had a good summer. And because we change parts so often, we graduate. We've had a lot of seniors that have played for us through the course of the 13 years. A lot of our players are somewhat unknown, to the people that make those type of predictions. I think it works two ways. I think it works, it could work as a motivating factor, like you mentioned. It also could work the other way. Sometimes because they put the Benet uniform on, they're expected to be at a certain level. True. without people even knowing, what we have on the team. So I try to stay clear of it. And, we want to progress. We want to move forward, as we go through the season. And those things start to merge. If you ever took a preseason ranking and looked at the end of the season, oftentimes, rarely do they align. There's things that happen through the course of the season and teams emerge. The team that won the most games in school history was barely in the top 50. I think in 2016, we lost in the state championship game. We won 31 games that year, and there were a lot of unknown kids at that time. And we won 31 games, and we're half away from winning the state championship. So you can't pay too close attention to what expectations are before we actually step on the floor.
That's such a good point. Such a good point. All right. So my last question that I ask all my guests is, what is one thing, Coach, that you would highly recommend? And it could be personal, professional, something that's top of mind for you right now.
I think for me personally, it's trying to keep balance. I think, I'm a full-time teacher, and obviously coaching is a full-time job, even on this level. Making sure that I keep my priorities intact and that I balance in my life, particularly with my family. And I have two children that are in college now, and my wife is very active. She's a very successful, college softball coach. And there's times where I'm away from basketball, but I'm really never away from basketball or school. There's times where sometimes I can overdo it. And I think keeping focus on priorities and balance is really important as I get older. And I think that's something that I think I would emphasize is that, I'm always thinking about, especially after a tough loss or, something didn't go your way, you can be consumed by it. And I think as I've gotten older, I've done a better job of balancing that, but I still have a long ways to go. So I just think no matter what you're involved in, keeping the balance between family and work and everything else is really important. And I think oftentimes the scales can be tipped in favor of work or your profession at the expense of family. And it's something I'm working on. I have to get better with, but I think it's really, really important.
I think that's such good advice. And I'm doing the same thing, trying. The one thing with the pandemic, I think it helped us maybe balance a little better than we were in the past and taught us that it is possible to do that. So I'm always looking for the glass is half full side of things, right?
Right. Exactly. It's a great process. When you love what you do, you can be consumed by it. And I think that's a great thing. I love teaching and I love coaching. So I couldn't ask for any more through the course of the last 29 years. It's been a great run.
That's fantastic. Well, Coach, again, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. I think we got a lot of valuable lessons that our founders and business owners can think about and apply. And it's not just about having the best product, man. You gotta build the team around it and get them to perform. So I thank you again for the time and best of luck with the upcoming season.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Take care.